Hello and welcome to your award-winning The Reasons I'm Broke podcast, bringing you the reasons we're broke every single week through news and headlines ranging from comics, movies, TV, video games, and more. I'm Daniel, and this week your co-host is Matt. Welcome back, Matt.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
And you ended up coming on in a great news week because we do have some heavy comic talk, actually, that I'm very curious to hear your perspective on. But for everyone else, if this is your very first episode, the way the format works is first we go through a bulk of news, and then we end it with the Brokehead Block, which is the more personal side of the podcast on what Matt and I have been doing since you last heard us. So let's jump right in and explore sector number 512. After 4 decades, Toho has released Season 2 of the Hanna-Barbera Godzilla cartoon. This marks the only time Godzilla Season 2 has been made available after its original broadcast. Did you grow up with this Hanna-Barbera production or anything related to it in the past?
I have very fond memories of Godzuki as a child. It's one of those things where, I don't think I could go back and watch it now, just because, I know for me it probably won't have aged well. So I like that nostalgic feeling of I know that it's out there for a new generation to discover. But yeah, it was a while when it aired. I was too young to remember it. A lot of stuff in the early 80s, was constantly played or syndicated or part of Saturday morning blocks and just constantly replayed. And so I saw it through some kind of syndicated thing. You know how everyone feels like the Brady Bunch was on for a decade and it was really only on for 4 years. So that was kind of like a lot of stuff in the early 80s is just constantly played over and over. So it seemed longer than it really was. And that was kind of like this Godzilla cartoon. Godzuki was the audience character.
Right. Almost seemed like
the audience kaiju.
yeah. Or Scooby-Doo-ish character. I don't know. It was kind of interesting. They found, or they tried to figure out a way in which they could get kids wrapped up in it. Okay, here's the friendly character because here's this big monster, and you really can't have the kids or any of the characters communicate with Godzilla directly. So they would have Godzuki there, who was related to Godzilla, and that's kind of how they made it work. And honestly, I don't know if there would have been a better way at that time to try to sell it to networks. Okay, how do we make this kid friendly? How do we get Godzilla on there? Only lasted 2 seasons, and obviously there wasn't enough of a punch even in the 90s or the 2000s for them to look at this and release it as a complete set. Even now, you can find all the episodes on YouTube through Toho's original channel, through their YouTube channel. So even they're we could put it out on Blu-ray, but why bother? It almost seems like even they're not confident enough.
Hanna-Barbera in particular, it was very much looked very much like if Hanna-Barbera had produced it. But what is it with us in anthropomorphic animals, particularly as sidekicks? You've got Scooby-Doo, Gleek, Dynamite. So it's that's what Godzuki was. It's just the latest anthropomorphized character for the human kids to go onto.
For some reason it worked. Maybe it sparked with Scooby-Doo, and then from there it was kind of expected from every kid's cartoon. Okay, where's our Scooby-Doo character though?
Right.
My brother had this show on pretty often. He was a bigger Godzilla fan as a kid than I was. I kind of watched it at the same time as he watched it growing up. And I know he was definitely more familiar with the Godzuki Godzilla cartoon than I was, but I would catch an episode here and there, but I just wasn't quite as enamored by it. But to anyone that did grow up on it, you can catch them all, which is really nice, on YouTube right now. But something else from our childhood was GoldenEye 007. While The World Is Not Enough was my choice N64 game, it had better multiplayer, and they made some improvements on the GoldenEye formula, in my opinion. But 007's GoldenEye was considered, and is still considered by many, to be one of the best first-person shooters of all time. And now the full achievement list has popped up on the official Xbox website. So it not only verifies that GoldenEye 007 is being remastered, but it does suggest that a launch will be coming our way sooner than anticipated. Usually when these achievements show up on the Xbox website, we're pretty close to a release of the title. It might even release between now and when today's episode launches. So what do you think about this remastering, GoldenEye 007 coming back to consoles after it being in limbo between the weird licensing of MGM, Nintendo, Rare, and now Microsoft?
I mean, pun intended, but GoldenEye is kind of like a gold standard first person. It's held up. It's one of those rare video games that, like, even if you play it now on, from like the original version, it still holds, like it still plays well. And with them remastering it, you're going to have a whole new generation hooked on it. I just hope that it gives you the same kind of feel and exhilaration, kind of the rush of playing that that original one, where you're just turning around all of a sudden, like you've got a polygon character right behind you, shooting you in the face.
I would love to see the reaction of someone, a teen today, or even someone in their 20s that had no context or any experience with the original N64 GoldenEye, other than maybe they heard that it was some old video game, for them to jump on it now. And I know the controls were pretty outdated as far as now you can have dual joystick to have better aiming. So it's kind of like relearning a new form of first-person shooter. So I'm curious if that'll catch on with some of the younger gamers, or if this will specifically just cater to people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s.
I have faith that they'll port it over well. I would hope so. I mean, my memories of playing that game is with that weird N64 controller was that it was basically like trying to do like the dual joystick control kind of thing. Like the controls were still kind of smooth, kind of fluid for something of its time. I think that's why it held up, because I think it was control wise a little more intuitive and a little bit more friendly than any other shooters at that time.
Did you have any sleepover stories or any friends coming over or anything like that as far as GoldenEye? Like, no odd job allowed? I remember that being a rule. Like, you can't choose odd job because he's the short one and he's hard to shoot.
Yeah, the rule was like you couldn't, like, no one could shoot. You had to drop the golden gun.
Yeah.
Because like anyone got the golden gun, like that was a game over. No one was going to get that person again. Like, because that was a one shot, one kill gun.
There was also the on-screening, man. Like anytime, like people would promise, like, no, I'm not looking on your screen. And younger brokettes need to remember this wasn't like a dedicated TV for just your first player version or whatever. It was a split screen, 4 players, 3 players, whatever. And you would each promise each other that you wouldn't see where the other person was on the map.
Oh, everyone was looking at each other's screen.
Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah, because I'd be coming around the corner and suddenly it's like, oh, yeah, I mean, someone's already aiming down the sights, like ready to shoot. Come on. Too obvious.
It'd almost be a little bit, it got a little bit more equitable, a little bit more fair when you had 4 people playing, just because there was so much going on. It was hard to focus on just your corner of the screen. And this is like way before current like widescreen TVs were popular. So you had a square TV that, you got one small square inside of a smaller square.
Back before there were memes, I saw this funny picture of someone's makeshift like blocker of that. It was like this cardboard cross where it would block out anyone else. You just had to sit close enough, and then that way no one would be able to cheat. Some gamer out there definitely was like, no, fuck this, I'm gonna build something. Well, let's move on over to some Disney Plus news. As stunt actor Dimitris Bistrevsky, who served as one of the 3 actors behind the suit of iconic, not just Star Wars villain, movie villain Darth Vader in Disney's Obi-Wan show, well, he has accused Disney of refusing to pay him for the time he spent doing rehearsals and reshoots in service of the show's production. Bistrevsky explained, quote, "Yeah, they never paid me for my rehearsals, and though I didn't want to do the reshoots because I didn't want to go into the darkness again, they told me to think about the fans," end quote. Not the first time Disney's had a problem with paying not just creators, but also actors. The more recent large event of this was Scarlett Johansson in Black Widow, so it doesn't really shock me that there's some smaller crew members throughout their different productions that probably aren't coming forward with this, but this one most recently is coming forward with what they feel they're owed from Obi-Wan.
Yeah, I mean, if they're willing to kind of like try to shaft Scarlett Johansson, who already had like mega budget, mega producing movies behind her. Like, it doesn't surprise me that they're gonna try to screw the little guy, even though he's a large guy.
Yeah.
I would definitely not want to mess with him. I think there's a little bit of added stress and drama behind it just because he is Ukrainian, and I'm sure that he's got family and friends back in Ukraine that are kind of suffering right now, and just trying to survive with the war over there. So I'm pretty sure that he's kind of split in a few different directions. But I saw that he was like his side of the story. He was marketing as NFTs. So people wanted a story. He had to kind of mint, or he minted them, and you had to kind of pay for pieces of it. With a lot of the money, whatever proceeds, like 90% of whatever proceeds he makes, like going back to like relief funds for people and family back in Ukraine. But his story is kind of rough, man. Like living in his car, or not, paying off credit cards and stuff like that. I feel like there's a little bit more to it because again, we're just hearing his side of the story. We're not hearing like the corporate sanitized response to it. But it doesn't surprise me that when you have multiple actors, you basically making up one singular character on the screen, that one or more than one are going to get screwed.
I do hope that they pay him what he's deserved if he was promised or was in the contract in there that he needed to get paid for the rehearsals or reshoots. They should absolutely come forward and make things right with him. And I know he also posted his paycheck and how a bunch of fees got taken out, like from $5,000, it went down to like $900 or something. And I don't think he was necessarily complaining about that, but he was kind of going, well, look, I really do need the money because after all that work, I have $900 to show for it or whatever it was.
It's almost poetic because like original Darth Vader actor David Prowse has a history of being screwed by Lucasfilm too before he passed.
Did you ever see that documentary where he redid that final scene in Return of the Jedi where he is in the makeup and everything?
Yeah. He's been erased.
Well, now I remember on Twitter, they were talking about Obi-Wan and Darth Vader, and they were like, it is Hayden Christensen underneath that suit. Look at the way he walks. And it's like, come on, man. Like, you really think they'd get Hayden Christensen in there to do all that work during the show? And now we know there's 3 different stunt people that are responsible for that. It's just kind of
same
funny.
thing with the Mandalorian. There's 3 people doing that, doing that.
And I bet you it's happening with Halo too, with Master Chief. There's no way it's that same actor. They probably have multiples under there.
Yeah.
On the comic book side of things, we have someone who is parting ways with Marvel as Joe Quesada, who is known, fan favorite comic artist who became a Marvel editor in 1998, eventually the chief creative officer. He worked on the indie book Ash with Jimmy Palmiotti, a local here in Florida in the 90s, came to Marvel in 1998 as the artist on Daredevil, and then Quesada and Palmiotti ran the mature reader line, which was Marvel Knights for the publisher, which had a little bit of a resurgence, I believe, lately. But he was also responsible for the controversial One More Day arc from Spider-Man that removed Peter Parker and MJ and their marriage from continuity. That was a huge deal that people still talk about today. And he also rolled out the Marvel Max line, which was another mature reader's label with Brian Michael Bendis. So pretty interesting because when you think of Joe Quesada, you almost think that he would have retired at Marvel or stayed there for the long haul.
Well, when he became the chief creative officer, he kind of like went a lot more behind the scenes. Like when he was editor in chief, he was definitely like trying to carry the old torch of Stan Lee and being like that very public, very boisterous kind of editor in chief. I'm hoping that we get more artistic work out of him from here on out after this. It's bold of him. I'm sure he's set for life as far as like money goes. Like he can pretty much go do whatever he wants now. But I really miss seeing his art on a regular basis. He was one of my favorite artists in the 90s. I loved his art on Ash more than his writing. His writing was a little bit reminiscent of McFarlane's Spider-Man run, in that it was just, okay, you're not a writer, but you're definitely trying to be a writer. If you look at the history of Marvel Comics editor-in-chiefs, he's probably one of the most significant since Stan Lee himself. He basically, Marvel in the late 90s was it was in bankruptcy. They weren't owned by Disney yet. They didn't have any films yet. They had to license a lot of their rights out to different studios, and that's why it's taken so long for Marvel to get like Spider-Man into their movies and the Fantastic Four back, and most primarily the X-Men. He was hired by Bill Jemas, who was, I think, the president of Marvel. He was hired by Ike Perlmutter, and he had a meeting with Joe Quesada, after the success of the Marvel Knights imprint that he and Jimmy Palmiotti were hired to run. And with the success of that, he laid out a plan for how to get Marvel back on top in publishing, because they lost ground to DC. And he brought on the Marvel Ultimate line, which still has a huge influence on the Marvel movies. He got their back catalog back in print. Like, everyone forgets that the trade paperback collection and the collected editions for Marvel were very, very bad and very sparse in the late 90s and early 2000s. But you could go to any like Barnes and Nobles or any bookstore, you would find plenty of DC collections in print. So he is largely responsible for the Marvel that we know today, and like you can't undervalue his contributions and what he did there. It's just a shame that the thing that he's most remembered for, most talked about, these days is, something that still irks me is that One More Day storyline, that he was the kind of like the one who pushed that. But like, even Michael Jordan had bad games.
Right. Oh, thank you for the insight. That's very good, because I do think that the company being what it is today, owned by Disney, and the same goes with DC being owned by AT&T and now Discovery, that I don't think someone like a Joe Quesada could make this kind of an impact with the current publishing line. I think because they are so owned by these larger companies, and you have to go through so many hoops, and okay, well, how does that align to what we're doing on TV, or how does that, each seems like each one of those companies now has all of these entertainment fingers in the pie of like, well, you can't do that if you don't do this. So kind of thinking of that, I could definitely see now how Joe would be like, well, what place do I really have anymore here? Like, it's not like Disney's just letting Marvel run, like, yeah, do whatever you guys want. It's clear now that the movies are dictating what's happening in the books.
Well, like I said, I was kind of surprised that he was even still there. Like, he's been kind of like in the background for a long enough time, but like you can still see his fingerprints and like the stuff that he did with the company on large, like still all over the movies. I mean, the biggest one that's continuing is you have the Black Nick Fury, which was something that was introduced in the Ultimates line, and basically he cast Samuel L. Jackson with Mark Miller in the Ultimates, and that's carried through, and like that's the version that they now made that the primary one in the Marvel universe. He's done a lot that is still to for his presence will be felt for a very, very long time. Not as much as Stan Lee's will, but like he will forever be a huge figure tied to Marvel.
You had mentioned that you'd like to see more artwork from him. Do you see him moving to either another publisher that currently exists or starting his own line, kind of like Dan DiDio and Frank Miller are doing right now?
I think I would hope that he goes back and just does something that's personal to him. Like, I don't want to see him like jump over to DC again. Like he's done these stuff with DC, and like he's got stuff that he did there that is still carrying through with like Azrael Batman is still remembered from the Nightfall storyline and his design for that. I would like to see him like get back into stuff that he has a little bit more equity in personally.
I love that you brought up Azrael. I think it was him that was on Word Balloon who said, yeah, we designed this Azrael suit in mind that these 90s readers kept saying, no, Batman needs to be more badass, and we need chains and we need pockets and all that. And he's like, okay, this is what you think you want. And then help design up that Azrael suit. And then, of course, immediately readers were expectedly like, no, where's Batman? What's going on? And he's like, yeah, you don't want this Batman.
It's new Coke. It's right. I mean, Coca-Cola was like losing ground to Pepsi back in the 80s, and so they made new Coke to a new flavor to kind of like compete more with Pepsi's flavor, and then their stock like dropped like overnight, and they had to go back to their original formula. and they haven't lost ground since. But like it's basically like New Coke. You give them something else to make people realize, like, oh, we really missed that thing that we thought we didn't want.
Mhm. It's that old saying of people don't know what they want until they see it, and sometimes when they see it, they don't want it.
Yep.
This was interesting from Dan Jurgens when asked why the comic industry has changed from an artist's medium to a writer's. Superman and BVS fan superstar Dan Jurgens had this to say, quote, "In a 2-year run on a book, a writer is going to be there every single issue. In this day and age, artistically, that is incredibly rare," end quote. I, for one, think that it's good that we're in a writer's market right now, or a writer's type of comic world, because I'm a believer that the story should, you can have terrible art on a comic book, and I know comics are very visual, but I will stick through a terrible looking comic for an incredible story, and not necessarily always with, like, there's some exceptions like Dustin Wynn, no matter how bad the story is, I will buy that comic. But 9 times out of 10, I want a good story over good art.
For me, it's a little bit more complex. I've been on both ends of that. Like, I've wanted to write stuff. I've done my own, writing personally. I've wanted to do art. Like, you can't have one or without the other in the comics. And the art can elevate a book. It can make, you can have pretty visuals, but it can be hollow without the right words. But you can have great words, and they can fall flat without the right visuals. So you can't, to say one is more important than the other. Like, you might prefer one over the other, but if you ever read like Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, it's like, it's a very unique synergy that has to happen between those two things. Now, what's happened, it's a little bit more complex than just what Dan Jurgens just said, and I'm sure that it's just one little pull quote out of a much larger thing, and the origin of where we're at with that goes back to the Marvel Exodus, when you had, Rob Liefeld, Todd McFarlane, Mark Silvestri, Jim Lee, like their biggest of big gun artists at the time, like all left to go found Image Comics. There was your biggest artists leaving. You had the rise of digital coloring and better printing technology, and then you had all these big name artists who now had better tools to present their art with, but that also meant that they were taking more time, because you could, render things more lavishly than you could. A lot of the things that in comic book, history, like the idea of like all like lettering being all capital letters, or Spider-Man suit, where the blue parts of it were actually originally intended to be black, but the blue was just your highlight areas. A lot of that had to do with limitations of printing technology at the time. So as things improved, you had, this surrounding of Image, and people were buying the comics no matter how long they took to come out. Like the original, like Youngblood series, Rob Liefeld put out issue 1 and 2, and then it was like 6 months before issue 3 came out. And so you saw like what people were like no consequence basically to a book taking months and months and months to come out. And then as Marvel and DC were increasing their printing capabilities to compete with Image, or keep ahead of Image, you had more people again waiting, not caring that it was taking months, but as far as like a larger corporate standpoint, it was hurting their bottom line. Whereas in Image, it was just potentially hurting like one person's bottom line, not an entire company's. Then going back to Joe Quesada, he comes in, does Marvel Knights. He takes over the company, and he now is trying to push the Image and raise the profile of Marvel into like something that competes with television and movies. And he's wants to bring this model of, well, a television series will put out like 13 to 22 episodes in a 9-month span. Comics, we can only do like one issue per month at best. But then you have some artists who now want to render things so detailed that they're taking longer. You're having schedules slip. You can't line up multiple different books that may have things they need to line up. Like plot point A is concluded in book B, but book B comes out way too late. For that, and it holds up this other book. So then Marvel and Joe Quesada and Axel Alonso, who became the new editor-in-chief, they concocted a plan to release like 18 issues a year of books. So they had a lot, like half the year you had 2 books of any particular title coming out. But to do that, you had to have multiple artists in the book. So it diminished. So obviously you couldn't have like 2 artists doing the same exact thing. You were going to be variances in quality. So you lessen the importance of the artist and raise the profile of the writer, because a writer can do multiple different books a month. You had, I think, writer Charles Soule. He was doing like, at one point he was doing like 8 books a month, and in addition to him being a full-time lawyer. So it's very easy for the writer profile to be raised because they can do multiple books. It's not as time intensive as doing one art. And then you had, like the big publishers lessening the importance of artists so they could put out more content to compete with other, media entities that they're not the same thing as. So sorry for that long-winded history of that, but it's a lot more complicated than just, an artist is better than a writer, or a writer is more important than an artist.
And it's good to know where the idea went to and where it kind of changed, because I know when I'm going through 80s or 90s books, when I was at the comic shop, I was kind of like, man, thank God we're not in that era anymore, because it was an era of Todd McFarlane's and Rob Liefeld's and the readers really gravitating towards the artists more than the writers at the time. And now it does seem like it is a little bit different. Mark Waid, I didn't put his quote in here because I'm not a fan of the guy, but he did mention that he believes that he said 20% of artists working today in the industry understand editorial, whereas back in the older days of whenever, I'm sure he's referencing when he was doing a lot more work or when he was just getting started or whatever he viewed as the best time in comics. He said that more artists were familiar with the editorial process, so they had a better collaboration with the writers during those times. And he doesn't believe that the artists today have that capacity. And that's what he attributes to the difference in writers versus artists as far as what's valued in comics today. Do you think there's any truth to that as far as how close an artist is today compared to maybe in the 80s or 90s as far as editorial, maybe even the 60s?
Well, Mark Waid is, if you like him or don't, like I've met the man several times and he's a very, very nice guy. And you drop like 100 books in front of him to sign, he will sign every single one of them. He loves talking to fans, and he is not a dumb guy. He's a big, he's probably the only one. I think he personally would probably only say that Kurt Busiek is probably the only one who has a greater historical knowledge of, like DC and Marvel than him. Although Mark Waid is probably one of the few people who could actually tell you what Superman's social security number is. It's out there, and I've yet to find it, but I know it's there out there. But he started before he was a writer. He started as an editor, and you had, when he was coming up was before social media, before the internet. So things and how close you are with people does change over time. And back then you had to work more collaboratively with people because, could have been weeks or months that you would see that person again, or you're not in the same town as that person. So you're constantly having to ship back and forth. So your communication has to be on point. Now, like there's so many different ways to communicate with people. It doesn't mean that your point is actually getting across. And where, writers are in my opinion, are just as important in a book as the artist, it's a lot easier for an artist to get more exposure on social media channels like TikTok or Facebook or Instagram. And so some may get a elevated sense of importance of their contribution to a book versus a writer. It's a lot harder for that writer to raise their profile. So the writer's chance to shine is typically in the writing of their book. Whereas the artist, if it's not working out with this writer, like I know I can go, post a shitty sketch on TikTok and how I did it, and I'll have, 70,000 people look at it in a day, and I'll get revenue from that.
And one last thing I do want to touch on as far as this, because it does come up very often anytime an artist is brought up as far as today's artists aren't really quite as quick on their deadlines or in getting out books, such as Jack Kirby, where it always comes out Jack Kirby. They always talk about how quick he was and how there's no one like Jack Kirby, not even in just his work, but in the speed that he could bust out pages like crazy. Why do you think that we do have that, where we don't have another? I'm not comparing his creations or anything, but just artists that can crank out pages at the speed of Jack Kirby. Do you think it has to do with the complexity of comics today compared to when he was working on them?
Complexity and printing technology makes a difference. First of all, yeah, not just like Kirby style. I'm not comparing style to style, but like there are a few who have, but they're competing against a larger field of artists now. Like Mark Bagley, he could crank out pages, but when Joe Quesaa, coming back to him again, when he started to do like 18 issues a month of like, Ultimate Spider-Man, or 18 issues a year of Ultimate Spider-Man, Mark Bagley was able to keep up with that, but you definitely saw a dip in quality the more he was producing. I don't think that Jack Kirby could hold up to produce the same amount of quality with the same kind of output or the same kind of printing technology and narrative demand that people have these days. You got Stuart Eminem, who was, I remember reading an interview with Warren Ellis when he was doing Ultimate Fantastic Four. He would send Stuart pages in the morning. By afternoon, he was asking for more pages to draw. And so, like, it really depends on how much how much focus and what kind of, like, how much detail or how much time you're to put in a page. Like, I know you've got some artists that have like your prestige level work that they're putting on something, and that's something that they're slaving over days over a page or over a panel and stuff like that. But that's something that they're putting off for like years. Like it's like their Pietà, their Mona Lisa, their book that they're willing to take time on. But then they have like your middle ground where, okay, I have 10 days. I have 10 days to work on like 5 pages. Or then you've got your guys who like they have like their style that they can just pump out 1 or 2 pages a day. John Byrne, who was like one of the last guys from like a big Fantastic Four guy and one of the architects making the X-Men as popular as they were in the early 80s, he could pump out like several pages a day. A lot of it just has to do with like how focused you are, how many distractions you are. Is this your only source of income? And now, like I said, with social media channels, like a lot of these guys have like multiple streams of income that they have to all service.
I'm glad you brought up the process, because I believe it was Jack Kirby who said when he draws a line on a page, he's like, that's the line. There's no going back and fixing it. He was like, nope, that's the line. All right, let's keep going. And then he would complete the page. Then you have someone like Greg Capullo, who I've seen on Twitter, like just scrap an entire day's work because he's not happy with it. And it's just interesting how so many different artists work in different ways. And you can kind of see how maybe Jack Kirby, as you were saying, with the technology today and all the stuff that we have, may not have been as successful in today's market, even with the same exact amount of talent, simply because it's a different landscape. Maybe it wouldn't really be the Jack Kirby that we know. Maybe he would be someone who took his time a lot more based on today's printing quality, like you were saying, expectations on artwork. Who knows? But I'm just glad that we did get that period of it.
I'm glad you brought up Greg Capullo, though. Yeah. Finish your thought.
No, it's just that I think moving forward, we're not going to get that kind of speed on art. And I think that's okay, but it's just kind of Dan answering that question of this is probably why we can't have that same, I don't know, kind of a long-winded way of saying this is why we're not in that era anymore. It's just more complex now.
So Greg Capullo, when he started Batman with Scott Snyder in the New 52, at one point, I believe it was on Twitter or something like that, he showed a comparison of art that he did is like commercial art for other clients, not comic book related, and then his comic book art. And you could see one looked very much like the Greg Capullo everyone remembered from, X-Force, Spawn, up to today. But you saw a clear transition. And then his stuff they did for his more commercial work for like things that no one in comics would ever like go and see it. You would never know that it was Greg Capullo's work if he hadn't told you, because the rendering style and the art style was so completely different. So that's like I'm saying, like you've got artists who like there's multiple different styles or amounts of time they're willing to give themselves to do that. So it really matters like where's your money coming from. Like that's wherever you're getting your most money from, that's where you're going to put your effort towards, in a particular kind of effort. And he knows, as long as he's been in comics, he knows like how much effort he actually has to put in to keep this fan base and this level of attention and revenue coming from this particular channel. And then he can do this other more finely rendered stuff as he has time to fit it in his schedule.
I love it. I love the comic talk. It was very good. I'm glad we got some good headlines this week for that. Let's head into some entertainment side of news this week, as Sony's Morbius film has returned to over 1,000 theaters following the social media meme campaign of It's Morbin Time. The movie debuted in theaters over 2 months ago, and it is now available to purchase digitally. The film had a worldwide total of $163 million on an estimated budget of $80 million, and has since developed a cult following of fans asking for a sequel, which I think with the way Jared Leto has been teasing some things on Twitter, it sounds like we're going to get. And I think the meme campaign, of course, has Sony thinking that there is something more to the Morbius franchise, and it didn't cost too much for him, and it did take in.
I'm kind of laughing at I'm hearing It's Morbin Time is like one of those things when you hear it, it's like, why didn't I think of that? But it's pretty funny. I still have yet to see Morbius. I just haven't been very motivated. There's been a lot of other things I've been more interested in seeing, but it didn't blow it didn't blow any records or make in a ton of money, but it did make more than proportionally, like well more than it actually cost to make. So regardless of what people liked it or not, cash is king. Mm-hmm. And it made substantially more than it cost to produce. So by those standards, there should be a sequel.
And I think by even them giving it an $80 million budget, they kind of knew that this wasn't going to be a $1 billion franchise. Oh, yeah. Now that they would have been pleasantly surprised, like Paramount is right now with Top Gun Maverick. But they're kind of like, I think this is more or less what they expected. Like, all right, if we can make this much, then we're pretty solid, or we can at least justify something else. Especially for a character like Morbius that is, it's lower than sea level. It's a character
he's less well known than Blade.
Exactly,
Blade was when Blade got his own movie.
That's where you get someone like Jared Leto, who can bring in his fans from his music and from his acting. He's a very solid actor. It's the reason, aside from it being a Sony Marvel production, I went to see it also because of Jared Leto. So, and I have no interest in the character of Morbius. Same thing happened with Venom. I was like, what, Venom? And then Tom Hardy got cast. I was like, oh shit, well, they fucking got me.
Mm-hmm. Well, it also did get delayed like 6 times. So like a lot of that was due to the pandemic, but it's like when you hear a movie constantly being delayed, it just carries an air of, well, it can't be that good if it was delayed that much. Like it used to be that, okay, if you heard a movie was being delayed a month, okay, that's not a big deal. But if you heard a movie was getting pushed back like 10 months, a year, that wasn't a good sign before the pandemic. Like it was usually like the kiss of death. Like the studio was just trying to dump into a dead month of movies to just cut their losses. But the pandemic kind of changed everything with that.
It really did. Like no one can guess anymore what the intention was.
A sequel to Top Gun would do the business that it did. Like it's Tom Cruise's like biggest opening weekend ever. Like it blows my mind.
And that's another one that was delayed for several years. I talked to my coworkers, and one of the guys was like, I thought that movie came out already. There was like no advertisements for it really. And then came out and everyone fucking went out to see it. I still haven't gone to see it yet, but obviously there's people talking about it. There's coworkers in the back that are a little bit younger than me. My sister went to go see it and she hadn't seen the first one yet.
Wow.
It's just kind of crazy. I don't know why. I could not tell you still why it caught people the way it did.
like Top Gun's like one of those movies that people are born having seen, whether they know it or not.
Right. I guess so. It must have just struck at the right time too. It kicked off the summer
Right?
blockbusters, really. They're saying it might even hit 1 billion, which is pretty insane.
Yeah.
We do have an interview with Mel from Batman Forever costume designer. This is a costume that is still being made fun of in all kinds of fandoms, media. I'm sure there's going to be a Harley Quinn joke in the animated series at some point because it's known for, at this point, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin for the nipple suit. But the costume designer Jose Fernandez spoke about his decision to add nipples to the suits, and he said, quote, "With Val Kilmer's suit in Batman Forever, the nipples were one of those things that I added. It wasn't fetish to me. It was more informed by Roman armor like Centaurians. And in the comic books, the characters always looked like they were naked with spray paint on them. It was all about anatomy, and I like to push anatomy. I didn't know exactly where my head was at back in the day, but that's what I remember. And so I added the nipples. I had no idea there was going to end up being all this buzz about it." End quote. So I know people went straight to Joel Schumacher. I don't know if they blame him for the nipple suit, but obviously there's a designer here who was responsible for it all.
Why do we have history? It's so we can learn from it, not repeat our mistakes. Maybe if the Romans hadn't had nipples on their armor, the Rome would have never fallen. I mean, maybe it's just a possibility. And ultimately, a director can say like, "No, I don't want that," but a producer can override that director. But just like a football team losing will get blamed, the quarterback will catch 90% of the blame and catch all the glory if they win, even though it was the defense that won it. The same thing with Schumacher. It's like his name is the one, as like the director is looked at as the one who's in charge of all that. I've heard the Roman or influenced by Roman armor thing before, and I do believe like that's what he wanted to, like that's what it was informed by. It doesn't mean that it's a good choice just because there's a historical allegory to it or analog to it. It's just it's a joke. It's something that made Batman sillier in a more modern time than he was in the 60s TV show.
What's always funny about that, I'm glad they brought up Batman Forever because Batman and Robin is the one that people point to when it comes to the bat nipples. But I remember going back and we were playing Batman Forever at the comic shop, and it's like, no, they've been there since Batman Forever, but for some reason, that's not remembered or blamed at as the nipple suit. It's always Batman and Robin.
It was focused on a lot more in Batman and Robin, and in Batman Forever, they focused more on the butt shots. You still had like the yellow and the bat symbol, so you had that kind of like, just like Batman's idea of like that is meant to draw fire because it's the most heavily armored part of his suit. So the bat symbol drew your eye away from the nipples.
That makes sense now.
Until it was all black.
I will tell you, over the years, I have felt more sympathy to the late Joel Schumacher because of things like this, and because now it's becoming more clear how much the studio interfered with Batman Forever and Batman and Robin in many ways. Like, sure, he still made the film, but he was very much, now that you kind of know, or we know, and he had since apologized, like, I'm sorry for Batman and Robin, but there were things like, you need to have this many vehicles, we need to sell Happy Meals, we need to sell toys, make sure that the script was very dictated by a studio that was in the business of, we need to merchandise the hell out of this movie. And I think that's one of the reasons why Batman and Robin ended up being as bad as it is.
Yeah, it was definitely like studio directed and all that. Like maybe he tried swinging for the fences and he fell flat. But I'm like, I felt bad for him too, that like this is the thing he was given so much crap for. When you look at his filmography, like he did some iconic fucking movies, even some really great films that people never really saw. Like he did Lost Boys, which is like, I watch that all the time. And that's a icon of the 80s. And then did you ever see Phone Booth?
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, it was a great movie. Like the whole thing took like 90% of that movie took place on like around, like in like within 100 yards of like a single phone booth. And he did Flatliners. Like he was he was a great director. And then, but unfortunately, like Even Michael Jordan had bad games. And unfortunately, his bad games were very, very high profile.
Absolutely. It's like losing the championship game, right?
Right.
Batman Returns director Tim Burton did share with Empire his thoughts on the nipple suits. He said, quote, "Back then, they went the other way. That's the funny thing about it. But then I was like, wait a minute. Okay, hold on a second here. You complain about me. I'm too weird. I'm too dark. And then you put nipples on the costume? Go fuck yourself. Seriously. So yeah, I think that's why I didn't end up doing a third film." End quote. I get it. They definitely did not want to go as dark as his first two films, so they got someone on that was willing to play ball, and they went even lighter with Batman and Robin. So it does sound like Tim Burton got out at the right time, because I think he would have butt heads probably on the level that Snyder has more recently with the studio, and he instead went, "No, I think I'm done with this. I'll go do something else instead."
My problem with Batman Returns has nothing to do with, like the darkness or weirdness of Tim Burton. It just had to do more with like, well, there was barely any Batman. Like there was, and they hadn't quite figured out how to do like multiple villains and service their stories well, all in the same. And a lot of movies have gotten a lot better lately, doing multiple villains in the same movie and making sure that, that everyone's getting their due. But it just wasn't quite balanced right. And if anyone wants to complain about how much Ben Affleck's Batman killed, they need to go rewatch Batman Returns.
Yeah, where he smiles and blows a guy up.
He literally stuffs dynamite down a clown's pants and knocks him into a sewer as he's blown to smithereens. He sets another guy on fire with the Batmobile. Like, he killed a Joker in the first movie.
That's true.
He gunned down all his people in that parade route with his bat plane. Like, you want to see a Batman that's a fucking murderous psychopath, you go back to Tim Burton before you go about talking about Ben Affleck.
I still love the one that in the first one where the guy's looking over the bell tower and he grabs him with his feet and fucking throws him right down there. It's like, oh shit.
Right. Right. But let's bitch about how Batman doesn't kill him just because Ben Affleck's playing him.
Right. Yeah, that's always the thing. Well, we have some amazing news that broke this week, and it got me. I was dancing for a few days, and no one I work with really cares. Like on this level, they're all into their own thing, and even Bobby, when I told him, he was like, "Oh, that fandom's probably really happy." Even though he's aware of all the problems, but he's also not like invested in it like I am. And this is the guy that if it's like you give me an option between Ann Sarnoff, Walter Hamada, and Toby Emmerich, Toby is the villain. Like that's the head of the snake. We need to get rid of that. Well, it turns out we got an amazing part of 2022 in that Warner Brothers Picture Group chairman Toby Emmerich is stepping down from his position at the studio, with Michael DeLuca, who is a fan of BVS specifically. He was talking about that, singing it praises back then, and Pamela Abdi being named as co-chairs to replace Emmerich as heads of both Warner Brothers and New Line Cinema. According to The Hollywood Reporter, DeLuca and Abdi are waiting for Amazon to release them from current contracts before making the jump, which could be as soon as next month. Now, the problem here so far is at the moment, Hamada is still there, but he will be reporting to these two new co-chairmen. And one source on the Wrap is stating that he will only be staying on until his potential replacement is chosen. We know that his contract is up in 2023, I believe November of 2023, sometime next year. There is a bit of restructuring here, but what are your thoughts? Because I know last time we were on, we were talking about Toby and the villain that he is, and how, well, if only that happened. And we're here, Matt. It is happening.
I was just going to say, like, I'm not saying I can give you your winning lottery numbers, but someone go back and listen to that episode that I was last on, that you and I were talking about this. And what did we say? The restructuring ends, and within days, if not weeks, Toby Emmerich was going to be out. They were going to put a little fluttery PR response to it, saying like, "Oh, he decided to step down. He did what he wanted to do." He wasn't going to be outright fired. He was just going to leave. We know it was going to be a firing. point is, we knew he was going to be gone. He wasn't going to be there to the end of his contract. And you know what? Neither is Walter Hamada. Walter Hamada will be out before November 2023.
Good. I 100% believe you.
I believe you.
And you know what? Mike DeLuca, Pamela Hebde, if you need a Kevin Feige, I'm just saying, I have a job. I'm happy with my new job, but I'll do it for you.
It is amazing news. I was so thrilled. And there were some detractors, of course. They always try to spin this, and these are people that have played ball with current Warner Brothers of, Toby's not really gone. He's going and he's doing his other production company under Warner Brothers, so he's still there, really. It's like, no, this is a demotion. It is a firing.
Oh, yeah.
That is a nice way of them saying, well, here, we're going to give you this. And that's it. I mean, it's clear as day that these films have not been doing well. Leave DC out of it. Look at the Harry Potter films. Look at the handling of all these IPs like The Matrix. All of that shit alone would get someone rightfully fired because they don't, they've proven time and time again. And I get that we're in odd times, but other movie companies have been doing well with their IPs. As much as I don't like the movies, the MCU have been doing well over there. Paramount just had a couple of hits with Sonic and Top Gun. And Walter Hamada and Emmerich cannot replicate the success that was there back when Ayer was doing Suicide Squad or when Zach was doing Man of Steel and BVS.
I mean, they drove away Christopher Nolan. Like,
yeah,
Warner Brothers, before the pandemic, Warner Brothers was the studio that visionary directors would want to go to because they knew where they were going to be able to have their artistic vision realized in 9 times out of 10. Warner Brothers has been like a complete mess for like the last decade. Like it's gotten worse and worse and worse that like you've got all these competing people coming in there and then scandals erupt around them. I remember like Kevin Sujihara when he like took over and, he was professed to be a comic book fan. And then he got swept up in the Me Too movement where he had inappropriate relations with people that were under him and he got out and it's just like, they keep trying to restructure and, rebrand and bring in new people. And there's been no consistency to who's running the film division for at least a decade now. And it's just like, okay, now that they're under Discovery, they're in this new company. They don't answer to AT&T anymore. Like this is their biggest chance to like really fix things and start over from scratch. And it looks like that's what they're going to do. Now they just need to get like their auteur directors back and to like believe that Warner Brothers has, their back again, not, Toby Emmerich, who, says like, we got to get these movies in at 2 hours.
To say the least. I know that I had this bit of hope last year and early this year of, okay, we can still do this. We can still make these great DC films, great Warner Brothers movies, these IPs. And maybe Zaslav is the one because I know a lot of people had put a lot of faith in Walter Hamada and he ended up just being another Toby Emmerich. I know someone else that just answered to him, that just did whatever he wanted. And a lot of people were fearful. And I know even some co-hosts on this podcast of, yeah, Zaslav, I don't know. I'm done being hurt. Like, I don't want to put all my hope and trust anymore on anyone because Zaslav could just be another Toby.
I'm not putting my hope in them. I'm just saying that this is probably their best chance to really turn things around because it's like a true break. You've taken this, it's a new owner. Everything is, you've taken this huge piece away from AT&T. AT&T is not running this by metrics. And I'm not saying that David Zaslav isn't going to run it by metrics either, but he seems to be like, I've heard you talk in other episodes and we've talked about it. That it seems like that even when like when the talks of them merging, doing this merger, that they were doing like things on Twitter, researching, like looking, trying to get get the pulse of what the fans wanted and what they actually thought. It looked like they were doing like their legwork. I mean, the fact that he's going to be taking a more hands-on approach to the Harry Potter franchise because like that's become a fucking mess. Right. And hopefully he'll be able to get, JK to like maybe just stay off of Twitter, stop angering people that looked up to you and admired your work by, being a TERF. Like just get off Twitter.
And my direction wasn't at all like what you were saying. It was actually, I still though have that hope of I do think Zaslav is that. Like I'm still willing to get hurt. Yeah, get my
Well,
feelings hurt.
it's not a Z. It means hope.
And
It's okay to have hope, but I also like identify with the people who are saying like I'm tired of being
yeah.
hurt.
Yeah, and I think it is because of the actions that he has taken. He's talked about going to talk to someone like J.K. Rowling. Supposedly, he's had meetings with Christopher Nolan of okay, what really happened? Why did you leave? Or who knows what conversations were happening? And obviously, he's spoken to Zach because there's been plenty of hints from him. Ray Fisher just tweeted out the other night of no problem on his shirt, and a lot of people took that as okay, maybe now after Toby Emmerich is gone, it all got resolved as far as the things that he had against people like Walter Hamada and Warner Brothers. We don't know. You know how they are very cryptic about what they put out there.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just a lot of positivity coming from the directors and the actors that are involved in DC films. And I think Zaslav seems to be, from the way he was running Discovery, a smart guy. He follows the money. He's about it's all about business. It's not about, well, I don't want to hurt your feelings. And there was that fucking rumor too of Toby and Zaslav have been golfing buddies for over a decade. It's like, so what? David does not give it. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy that would care like, hey, no hard feelings, but we're getting rid of you.
You don't have to like a guy to play golf with him. You're playing against each other.
True. This shift does come as Warner Brothers Discovery chief David Zaslav is restructuring the company, and he's putting it into 3 distinct verticals. Warner Brothers / New Line, run by Michael DeLucas and Pamela Abdi, with DC Universe, run by Walter Hamada, who's reporting to DeLuca and Abdi, and the animation department, which right now the lead executive is to be announced. This same structure is, from what I saw in reports, I'm not too familiar with what's happening at Disney, but supposedly it's similar to what is happening with the MCU and Disney and Star Wars. And Zaslav has had conversations with Kevin Feige, which has gotten people really nervous. Like, oh shit, is he going to sell? You know, there's been that. He's going to sell DC to them. Or a lot of the reports are saying instead that he's actually trying to get familiar with what they're doing over there to perhaps do it here as far as structure, not necessarily making more MCU movies out of DC characters like they have been, but instead that's how you're running an entertainment company over there. Okay, that's interesting. Not necessarily they're going to do that too, but kind of understanding the competition more than anything.
He's smart in that he's doing his research. I mean, it's a common business practice that you will have like the boards of a lot of like big companies, big corporations. The board members are not people who actually like typically work for the company. They're people who work in similar positions or have similar levels in related but not exactly the same company. So like it's like Marvel and DC, like a lot of the competition between them has to do, like the more vicious part of it has to come down to like the fans. As far as like on a pure corporate level, yeah, there's competition, but it's not like personal. Like, you know, when you have, you know, like NFL teams or basketball teams or baseball teams, it's like they're competing against each other, but you know, it's kind of a industry. As far as the industry goes, if one goes up, the other should go up too. If you had a Starbucks, you know, open up next to a coffee, like a mom and pop coffee shop, those mom and pop coffee shops also saw their sales rise. If you have no competition, then that's when, you know, you just become too overconfident. And Marvel at this point, like him or hate him, they've got a proven business model and other places have not been able to replicate, you know, as far as like an interconnected universe. People are starting to get, you know, the right idea now. Marvel is still the gold standard of how you do a interconnected universe that, you know, everything. They basically run Hollywood right now on a blockbusters level. I mean, that's it. Yep. You do have those other ones that are coming in there. Like it's everyone being mad at Disney about like, you know, when, you know, this anime movie, you know, it's imported from Japan doesn't do as well because, well, some, you know, parent in Kansas wanted to take their kid to see it. And like, then you had like blood and guts in there and like cartoons are supposed to be for kids. Like, no, it's a certain perception that you have because of a successful business plan that a lot of people have seen and like has shown to, satisfy people. I'm kind of going out a lot of tangents here, but it's like he's smart to at least talk to the competition. Kevin Feige is he almost went to Warner Brothers and he was button heads with Ike Perlmutter back in 2015. So
Gotcha.
like he's a business guy. He wants DC to succeed as much. So because he's a fan of those characters as well. But yeah, Marvel pays his bills, and as long as he gets to do what he wants, and as long as they're making money, like he would want DC to be successful.
You had brought up Harry Potter, so I'm going to jump forward a little bit to this because the rest of this is Zaslav news and what he's kind of doing with the future of these IPs and properties. But it is reported by The Wrap that he does plan on having a hands-on approach to these different divisions, these vertical divisions of the studio. A lot of people are comparing him to the Kevin Feige now of Warner Brothers or of all of these things, Discovery, everything. And it's in the report that it's suggested that he may reset the Potter universe or the Potter brand. And for context, you mentioned Fantastic Beasts. The last one, Secrets of Dumbledore, opened at only $43 million at the box office earlier this year. He did mention a few weeks back that he plans to meet with JK for future Potter projects. I mean, at this point, do you think we're looking at a television reboot, HBO Max reboot, maybe a complete refresher or even going far in the future of doing The Cursed Child and bringing back the actors that people are familiar with?
I mean, I'm sure that she created a rich universe that there's other stories to be told in there, just like they're showing with the Star Wars properties on Disney Plus. Like there's other nuggets to mine. There's a lot of rich content out there that what you really need though at this point is to like you kind of need to like George Lucas, J.K. Rowling, and that you need to like, okay, I want to buy this IP from you. What's the number? How many zeros do I have to put after? What's the first number, and how many zeros do I have to put after it? Because George Lucas, created this great property. The prequels didn't get the response immediately that he wanted, and before Disney bought Lucasfilm, like there wasn't really any new Star Wars content. There was just like the Clone Wars. It was very divisive amongst the fans. So as far as like JK, like she created something that largely will stand the test of time, but maybe she's being a little too precious with her children. I mean, it's a little too. May not be widely known, but like the theme parks here at Universal, where they have the Wizarding World of Harry Potter lands and stuff like that. She has to like she can say yes or no to literally anything, any decision that they make in those parks, down to like the name tags on the actual people there. So like she has an enormous amount of creative control. That doesn't mean that all her decisions are right. She just has no one to tell her no. And that was the thing with George Lucas when he did the prequels. Like there was really at that point no one to tell him no. Star Wars was already established. He made all his money from it. He was funding the prequels with it. So like there was no one telling him no to like maybe, and he had no limitations of like so he didn't have to be as inventive with the new one, with the prequels, as he was with the original series. So same thing with J.K. Rowling. Like there's really no one to tell her no. And so maybe he needs hopefully like this conversation comes up with like, listen, these are things that are hurting this brand. We like it. We want to see it flourish, but your anti-trans stance is not helping it, is not good for it. It's hurting multiple businesses, multiple lines. And then standing behind Johnny Depp during this whole defamation trial in the UK, which, he got paid $20 million for one day's worth of work on filming Secrets of Dumbledore because they had to pay him for showing up to work. And they just, neither of the Fantastic Beasts series that she's had the most creative input on hasn't had like what hasn't been set on fire, hasn't set the box office on fire. Every movie's performed substantially less than the one that came before it. And it's supposed to be two more movies.
Well, you heard it from Matt Stradamus here. We are going to get a buyout from Harry Potter out of J.K. Rowling's hands. It's going to go straight. All right, you heard it right there. That's a perfect. No one's brought that up yet that I've heard.
Rehab it with a like an HBO Max series. Like there's lots of stories that that can be told. Start with an HBO Max series. Doesn't have to be Harry Potter. It can just put it in that universe. Like the Mandalorian's not a Skywalker story, but he makes an appearance there, and that's it. I think just J.K. Rowling, like they need to distance her from her children are grown up. She needs to let her children go out on their own.
There you go. And according to The Hollywood Reporter, Zaslav has reportedly asked, as part of his conversations with other members in film and other directors that maybe had a rocky relationship with the previous regime, he's asked Todd Phillips to serve as an advisor to DC Films. Although he won't have any executive duties, his previously intended Joker movie was what he wanted to be the first in line of DC Black Label films, which Emmerich and crew were not interested in. In fact, they were so convinced that it was not going to do well that they split the box office with a Chinese company, an investment company, I believe, so that they can put in for some of the $55 million that it cost to make the Joker movie. Ended up making $1 billion. Half of that went to that Chinese company, and Warner Brothers once again made what I think should be a fireable decision in that part. So when that did not end up happening, Todd did not come back, and he has since kind of hinted at Joker 2, but all of a sudden now that Toby's gone, we're getting this news about a Joker 2 getting greenlit. So it sounds like this report is right.
Works out.
Of course. Of course. It is currently the Joker film is the most profitable comic book film ever made, bringing in $1.74 billion on a budget of $55 million. Something similar is going to happen with Top Gun, and something that I'm sure would have been a nice surprise again from Morbius if that had happened. So I think a smart move if they want to give him, hey, do you still want to do those movies that you wanted to do back when these guys didn't want to? Are you still interested in that? Come on board, because we'll let you do it.
Todd Phillips is not the person I would have ever expected previous to the Joker to be that guy, but like maybe he can be like the Kevin Feige of a Black Label line, like not tied to any continuity. And this is gonna get me some hate from some listeners, but I have still yet to watch the Joker, and I've made my position clear on that because I don't want to see a Joker movie that's got nothing to do with Batman and the origin. Yes, you could look at it as, okay, well, in this multiverse, this section of the multiverse, Batman's got nothing to do with the origin of the Joker. But from all accounts, from everyone I've heard, that's seen it, that it's a beautiful movie. It's well crafted. I thought Todd Phillips was a great comedy director before that. I wouldn't have expected him to have made something that was so dramatic and one Oscar winning.
Yeah.
And so like clearly he's the man knows what he's doing, and he's got stories to tell, and he's got a vision. So like, don't let him go like you let Zack Snyder go.
And Tuesday afternoon, it was announced that the Joker 2, the script is written, and there was an image shared of Joaquin Phoenix reading the script. So this title is Joker Folie à Deux, which is a psychiatric syndrome where two or more people begin to share delusions. So I don't know if you remember a couple of months back when Willem Dafoe was talking about how he would love to play a Joker in the Joker sequel.
I would killed for him to be a Joker.
Well, based on his quote, and I'm not saying he's going to be in this sequel, but it sounds like he already knew what this plot was going to be. Just based on this title, it sounds like there will be multiple Jokers in this film, like maybe an imposter, which is what Willem was talking about. So I think the script has been floating around for a while now.
Yeah, I will be sure to watch Joker before Joker Folie à Deux comes out. I'll make that promise. I will watch it before the sequel comes out.
All right. Pretty cool. Very good.
Maybe I'll watch it the day before, and then I can immediately go into watching the second one.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I hope you like it. It definitely does fall in line of like you were mentioning. It elevates the medium, and at least like super or comic book medium, if you will. And I didn't $1 billion, man. It's insane. Of course they were going to do a sequel. Like there's no way, with or without Todd Phillips, honestly, I think.
Well, what would have happened though with Toby Emmerich still there?
That's true. That's true.
He needed almost $2 billion to convince him otherwise.
Apparently. But there you have it. That is our block of news for this week's episode. Let's head into the Broket block, which is what Matt and I have been doing this week, playing, watching, or reading. So Matt, last time we had you on, you were getting ready to move on from your older job, which was retail. And now you're about a month and a half in on your new position. So please tell me, how are things going over there?
Oh, it's going fantastic. I do not miss retail. I haven't stepped in my old workplace since I walked out the door on my last day, and it has nothing to do with the people there. I just it's okay. I need time away before I go visit the old haunt again. I know that they've been having some more turnover there, and it's disheartening just because I never left there because of any animosity towards my boss. It was just time to move on, and it was more of just working with the general public was getting more and more difficult. And I lost passion for what I was doing. The new job is working out great. Still in training. It's an intensive, long training program, but you know what? I get to get up in the morning, which is, it's weird that when I worked in retail, I would never wake up before my alarm. Every single morning, I've been working at this. I've been in training at this new job. I've woken up at least 15 minutes, often 45 minutes before my alarm goes off, and I only have to walk 2 rooms to get to my workplace. So my wife works for the same company. She will get up at 7:55 and go to and take a long, slow walk to her desk. Whereas I like to get up a little earlier. I'll have breakfast ready, something to get the day started for both of us. And my days seem longer. My weekends are full. I don't have to work on the weekend. It's Monday through Friday. I sit by my window with the shades open, the sun shining in, and I am as stress-free as I've ever been in a job. There's still a lot to learn. The training program is still another, I think there's still another 6 weeks before I'm in my official role. So there's still a lot to learn. The benefits are fantastic, and I love not being in retail. I have no complaints.
That's good. That makes me really happy that things are shaping out well for you, and that you do save a lot of time by not commuting. It's kind of insane.
I've saved so much time, and we figured out within this first month, we don't need 2 cars.
Right, that's true.
I sold my car on Sunday.
Wow.
I shopped around to 4 or 5 different places online to getting preliminary offers, and I still had payments on the car.
Mm-hmm.
I got well more back than what I still owed on it. And so I don't have the car payment anymore. I don't have insurance anymore, and we only have to pay for gas for 1 car.
And
which is great because the brand's going up $300 a month next month.
Yeah, and I was going to say too that you probably sold it for more than you could have 5 years ago, because cars are so sought after now that they are people are willing to pay. Companies are willing to pay more for that vehicle. Kelly was looking at her car, and she could sell it now for more than what she paid for it, which is kind of crazy.
Used cars, how hot the housing market was during weirdly during the pandemic, especially in Florida, because you had people moving down from states that were more locked down and coming down here where there was less restrictions. So there was a lot of there was more people moving here than there was inventory of houses.
Right.
And then you had a lot of people just buying houses and flipping them. That resurged. But the same thing kind of happened with cars. The supply chain chokes made used cars much more desirable, especially with when if they still had lower miles and were in good shape. My car was it was a 2015 that I bought about 2.5 years ago. that had 24,000 miles on it then. I had 43,000 miles on it. So 2.5 years, I'd only put 20,000 miles on it. And there was anything that was wrong with it was like cosmetic. Now, one place I tried taking it to, like their initial offer was $100 more than what I actually ended up getting for it. But when they went and did their inspection of it, they went over it with like a fine tooth comb, trying to like find every little defect, and they come back to me with like an offer that's like 2,000 less than what I owe. Wow. Like, how long is this offer good for? Like 5 days. I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna take it some other places, and they're like, well, I can kind of like put this around to our partner dealerships and see if any of them want to give you a higher offer. And they called me back when I was on my way to CarMax, and they were like, we can offer you 10,000 on it. I'm like, let me call you back. I'm on the road right now. Let me call you back. I called them back like an hour later, and I'm like, I just got an offer for 2,000 more, almost 2,000 more than what I owe on the car. So I will be selling it to them.
Right, unless that's when you're like, unless you can, yeah. How badly do you want this car?
Yeah, unless you want to like up that offer. So, I mean, it's a great time to have a used car that's got lower miles on it. That's in good shape.
Yeah, don't tell me that, because mine's at 74,000 ish, but it's having trouble turning on, and I'm like, oh, of course, now's a great time for that. And I've taken it to 3 different mechanics, and they're all like, I don't know, I can't replicate the problem. I'm like, all right, I guess I'll wait till it doesn't turn on, and then I guess we'll see. And I've had some people tell me like, well, maybe it's the spark plugs. Try changing those. And
electrical's a fickle beast.
It is, but for now, it's all right. What else has been going on then, though, outside of the job?
We're just doing a rewatch on some of the Jurassic movies with the new one coming out. It'll have just come out when this episode drops. We've been wrapped up in the new season of Stranger Things. Really disappointed they're got to wait a month for 2 episodes, but loving that. And that's about it. Like, it's just we went to Magic Kingdom last night for the first time in I think October of 2020 was the last time we were in Magic Kingdom. And after last night, like, okay, maybe it'll be a couple more years before we go back again.
I was just gonna say it's a very different park than it was even 2 years ago.
It makes no sense that I mean, it was actually a productive night. We went on like 3 or 4 rides in a show, got food. Like, it actually wasn't as busy as I was expecting, but still, it's the most people-y park of all the Disney parks. There's just, you can't go anywhere without getting run over by a stroller, or in that park. Leaving the park is always a much bigger ordeal than actually getting into the park. Like, it can take you half an hour getting into the park once you leave your car, but then it could take you an hour, 2 hours to get back to your car at the end of the night because of the number of people that are all leaving at the same time. And we thought we left at a good time last night, but the monorail was down, so it left only the ferry has your option to get over there, and you've got like 10,000 people trying to get on a ferry. But of course, like, just when we can't get out of the line, the monorail starts running again, and we just see like a sea of people heading towards the monorail. But we were too deep in the line to get out there. But it was fun. But we're definitely like, that park needs to sell alcohol, like, more than just at the sit down restaurants, because parents need it there. Like, we don't have kids, and we're like, we wanted to buy certain parents beers for how terrible their children were behaving, which honestly is on the parents' head for like,
sure,
bringing them out, bringing small children out to a very crowded park on a day where the heat index felt like it was 98 degrees, almost 100 at 8:00 at night. So like, their kids are cranky. You're paying thousands of dollars to take your family to this park, and your kids are clearly not enjoying it right now.
Yeah, it's tough during this time of year, and with all the crowds and restrictions and all of that stuff, it's a tough time. And that's why we haven't made it a priority to take Leo to any of the parks. I think we went to Animal Kingdom a few months back because it's one of the slower parks still.
Mm-hmm.
And he only likes, we wanted to show him the dinosaur stuff. We don't need to go on the super new rides like Avatar or anything like that. And so it's like, all right, let's go to the little dinosaur section and let's check out some animals. And that was it. And he liked it. So it made it worth it. But I don't think we'd take him today, at least, to some place like Magic Kingdom, because like you were saying, it's bad enough going with your significant other, just trying to deal with everything on their own. But to then have a 4-year-old or a number of kids, forget about it.
Yeah, like we're much bigger fans of going to Epcot or Hollywood Studios, Animal Kingdom. There's some weird choke points in there where it just gets too crowded with people. But like Magic Kingdom is, I think that might be like a once a year kind of thing for us if we decide to keep our annual passes when they come up for renewal again. But we're here mostly for like, the Star Wars and like the food wine festivals.
Well, on my end, I've had, I'm sure I've told you before, you've seen that I'm at the new gig now, thanks to Bobby, the manager at the store. And I've known him. He's a friend. I've known him for, I'm pretty sure over a decade now, since I worked at the comic shop back in Orlando. So we've known each other for several years. And yeah, I think I've settled into, okay, I kind of know more or less everything, where everything is and what the process is. And the trainer, the guy that trained me and the others, he was like, yeah, you caught on to this extraordinarily fast, but I know you've been in retail. And I'm like, yeah, trying to do my best. And that's it. It's not like where I worked at my other gig of managing a comic shop. You know what it's like. And it's incredibly stressful. And this is a very good change of pace for me right now. And it's been working out okay. And now I've gone through some set releases. There's a new Magic the Gathering set that is coming out on Friday, and it ties in with Dungeons and Dragons. So there's some busy moments for sure when new sets release, which is basically every other month, it seems like, between Yu-Gi-Oh!, Dragon Ball, Pokemon, and Magic. That's like the business's bread and butter. So that's been really interesting to just see the trading card side of things and how that's been rolling out. But I've also truly realized, because aside from Bobby, I'm the oldest guy on staff, at least in the front end, not kind of in the warehouse. So today I made a reference to, there was a Magic card that came out that someone ordered, and I'm like, Angel Fire. And I'm like, I remember Angel Fire. And the guy's like, huh? And I'm like, no, Angel Fire. He's like, no. I'm like, do you know what GeoCities is? He's like, no. And I'm like, oh my God. And I turned to dust immediately. I'm like, oh man, you're too young for it. How old are you? He's like, oh, I'm turning 27. I'm like, oh yeah, you're too young for this. So I asked the next.
The original Angel Fire card is almost older than him.
That's crazy. So then I asked like the next oldest guy to me. I think he's gonna be 30. And I was like, you know what Angel Fire is, right? GeoCities is like, no, I don't. And I'm like, oh my God, where's Bobby? Like, I need Bobby today. I need someone. I've now reached an age where my point of reference is too old. Like, I'm outdated. The things that
you got to ask them if they know what MySpace is.
I bet you they won't. I almost joked that I'm like, I bet you don't even know what a VHS is. But I was like, all right, that might be ageist or something. So, but yeah,
VHS though is kind of like the forbidden technology that people somehow still know about. Like it's kitschy. It's referenced enough in movies that it's like there's a false nostalgia that people who didn't grow up with it think they grew up with it because of their parents.
But it is a weird feeling, Matt. Like, I don't like it. Like the things I reference are not understood.
And wait until you're my age, where like now you're at that point where like, wow, I really cared that much about that stuff. Like that really ruled half my life. Whereas like now it's just like, I got no time. I'm too tired for your arguments. I just want to go have a beer and sit on my porch. It's like I've been like, my social media presence, my interaction with it has been like slowly, especially like slowly before the pandemic, but especially since the pandemic has been less and less and less. And now like there's just certain things I keep looking forward just like to looking at just to like kind of doom scroll and watch the world burn. But like largely it's just like, man, this shit used to be important to me. Like arguing with someone who's, like that I over some something on Facebook or Twitter, or like this was something that I really thought I was going to change someone's mind. Like, no, it's just time I spent doing, on things that just really ultimately like don't matter. But if it hadn't been for that stuff, I wouldn't have a lot of the people in my life that do matter most to me right now.
Yeah, that's one of those things where without social media, I wouldn't know Kelly either, which is kind of crazy too. So yeah, it's definitely a part of, and I know that upcoming generations, because I was working with a 19-year-old at the comic shop, and she's like, yeah, my niece doesn't do, I think it was, she's like, my niece doesn't do social media. Like kids growing up are like, no, social media is bad. I'm just not. So it sounds like it might even be a generational thing where they might not even have profiles in that during that period. That might not be appealing to them. They kind of see it as it's too personal and too out there, which is really fascinating because you would think it'd be the opposite, where kids would be streaming their lives 24/7 or something.
It's funny, but like I want to say, like I'm coming up on 10 years that I've lived in Florida, and sometime like the first couple of years that I was living here, I was at a party at my cousin's at the time boyfriend before they got engaged and married. I was at a party at their house, and a couple of people and I were just talking about social media and this and that, and we all kind of talked about how like, and all at that time we were all very involved. Like social media was like a very overriding presence, and like we all kind of talked about how in like another 10 years, like what would it look like? And then I kind of could see, Mastradamus talking with no evidence that I said this, but it kind of put out there, like I could see in a decade, 15 years tops, where you're going to have like a generation coming up that like fucking hates social media and wants as little to do with it as possible because of how much their parents were on it and how much time that they put on it that took away from them. And you had like parents like starting, Facebook profiles for their kids and putting more of their kids, personal details and growing up out there, that like putting these slideshows, these personal details out there that like, wait a second, you told everyone you've got 1,000 friends that can magnify across millions of people that I pooped myself in public when I was 2 years old. Like, and that's still out there forever. So like,
True.
you're gonna have like a generation of like people that are growing up that like, and they're starting to grow up now, where like they realize just how much stuff out there that was out there they had no choice in putting out there, and now they're kind of taking those reins back and like, I don't need this much of my business out there, and I kind of respect that.
Is it going to be like Rugrats? Will there be lawsuits in the future? Like, I didn't prove you to put this out there, my face out there.
You kind of had one with right? the Nevermind kid with it was on the cover of the Nirvana album Nevermind. Like,
oh shit!
He tried suing recently for it was either his parents or suing like the record label again, saying that it was basically child pornography. His rights were violated when he was a child, like, and like he's forever known as like as that kid, and like you've got a nude picture of him on this cover, and like no one knows if you don't keep bringing it up. Like no one's looking at this picture of you as a baby and like and can look at you now as like a 30-year-old man and know that's you without you. But again, he didn't have that choice to make, and like it's definitely affected his life later. So like you've got, I wouldn't be surprised if you see or read about more, people get as they're heading into their 20s, like to their 20s, their 30s, like having some real issues with their parents about how much of their lives were on social media for the public to consume before they even knew what social media was.
You know how twisted my mind is and how much of a product I am of social media? Because I immediately went, why doesn't he recreate that photo now in his 30-year-old body, like as a joke? And it would blow up.
But he did like 10 years ago.
Oh, he did it? Okay, well, yeah. Shit, man.
He didn't do it in full nude. Like he was in a swimsuit, but like there was a time where like he was very much about like, okay, hey, I'm the Nevermind kid, and it was only recently where he was like, I don't want to be associated with this. Like, well, you kind of fed into that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, it's been awesome talking comics and Toby Emmerich and celebrating his leave. And again, the rotation just works itself out every time, it seems like.
Yeah, it's magic. Lots to talk about today.
And I know we talked about anti-social media, but please let them know if the Brokehead Core want to contact you, if they want to continue the conversation, where can they find you?
At Madner.com on Instagram or Facebook.com/Badner.
Eventually, will we have to do just a dedicated email for you or something?
Probably.
Yeah.
Like I'll have to come up with like a fake email just to like, or you know what? Put a message in a bottle and send it out to sea. if it makes it my way, it was meant to be.
There you go. As always, you can find us at thereasonsimbroke.com. And Tree Frog Grading did a great spotlight for the podcast on their Instagram. As a reminder, if you want to get some trading cards graded, Magic the Gathering, sports cards, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Digimon, Pokemon, I know Pokemon's huge for it, you can head on over to treefroggrading.com. And it is a grading company that came out of the pandemic. It is veteran military owned. If you use the discount code BROKE, you get 5% off your order. So thanks again to treefroggrading.com. And to you on the other side for tuning in, whether it's your 512th episode or your first one. Matt and I really appreciate it, as do the rest of the co-hosts on here. Thank you once again for joining us this week. I've been Daniel, joined by Matt, and Brokehead Core. All will be well. So, Matt, I do have to ask you, since you did put the offer out of being the Kevin Feige of Warner Brothers Discovery, whatever they end up calling that app, that they are going to be merging into it. There's a rumor that Zaslav has approached Zach to be the head of an R-rated line of films, not separate from what Todd Phillips is doing with DC Black Label. Now, what do you do with Zach, aside from asking him to please finish Justice League 2 and 3? What else would you put him on if he had interest beyond Justice League 3?
I think you have him be like Christopher Nolan. Like Christopher Nolan was like, a producer behind the scenes and of Man of Steel. And like, he's got a sensibility. Like I don't feel like he's a particularly like egotistical person. Like you see him in interviews, you see other people that interact with him. Like there's talent that respects him and like wants to work for him. So like, I feel like outside of finishing like his intended story, I think he could be, like your Kevin Feige, if he wasn't such a visionary guy that was like still had like stories to tell. So I feel like you let him do what he wants to do, and then just say carve out like a consultancy fee, like or time that kind of like I know you haven't really watched all of the Marvel movies, but like have him be like Tony Stark, where like, okay, we're gonna invite you into being the Avengers Initiative, but like you're just a consultant now because like you've got all these other things going on and we don't know that we can control you. Like, okay, just have him consult on it, and like, is this a good direction? Is this a good hire? You see this person go? Like, I think he's got a lot of creative input and he's very visionary. I would not want to pull him out of being able to make his own movies, but being like a Kevin Feige type, I think takes him too much out of that. He would have to be, coordinate too many things. I say let him finish his Justice League storyline, and then after that, you hire him as like your creative consultant. Like let him do his movies, and then just work on his movies Monday through Thursday, and on Friday he takes meetings about various directions and things that they want to go in. But as far as like a more adult themed one, series line, like I think he'd probably work pretty well with Todd Phillips.
I think so too. Well, here's another suggestion, because Zach liked this post on Vero yesterday, and a lot of people overlook her, but Deborah Snyder is a producer. How about someone suggested that she be the new head of DC Films instead of Walter Hamada, and Zach liked that post.
Absolutely.
Do you think there's something to that there?
I mean, she's only been his, life partner and producing partner for a long time. And like, so she's got her hands in as many decisions as he does. I'm sure that when he comes up with an idea or direction, I'm pretty sure that, she's the first person that he talks to. Like, what do you think? And so I feel like, she's got more to offer than just working on his movies. be a producer in his movie. So, I mean, she could be the Kevin Feige. She doesn't have to be the Kevin Feige. She could be the Deborah Snyder.
Right, there you go. Perfect. Perfect way to end it right there. I love it.